If there's only one thing that you leave this video with, it's going to be the fact that Riot is really trying to keep true on their promise of shaking things up for the World's patch. While not every single change is made geared towards pro play, even those can still have an effect on solo queue, and of course there's all the rest that we're going to feel whenever we're playing games. Some of the changes have definitely been questionable, but I mean, they're happening, so we gotta adjust our tier list for them, and of course, that's what this video is all about. But at any point, if you're looking for in-depth guides that can actually teach you skills and concepts or even learn new champions with, make sure you go check out our website, GameLeap.com, where we actually have a 50% summer sale on right now. But that can wait until later. Right now, we have to cover quite a bit because there's a lot of spicy changes. Starting with the mid lane, of course, it's always worth pointing out who's in the broken tier. And right now, Annie and Diana are still going to stick around, but Galio is actually going to join them. And this is because of something that I talked about in the Broken Tricks video, which if you haven't watched, you definitely should, because there's a lot of important stuff there about what's really good on the patch. Galio is one of those champions who can be a diver and somebody who has anti-dive capabilities really easily. That's not to say that he's good against every single diver, and I'm not 100% sure if he's actually going to be that amazing on the next patch. Keep in mind, guys, that this is a prediction tier list. I'm not like pulling facts out of my Shuriman library and just reading them off to you. And if in the middle of that sentence you were thinking of a certain word that I did not use, then, my friends, you have been baited, and now you must click the like and sub buttons in order to make up for it. Because of the changes that Riot has been pushing out over the past couple patches, all coming together and less mobility being around in general, champions who can do that sort of a thing, the thing that Galio is really good at, controlling areas, CCing people, and cutting off escapes or dives, is going to be more powerful on this patch. You will probably be able to see a little bit of a trend as we go along mid, and the other tier lists as well, that kind of follow suit with this. This patch just absolutely screams, to me at least, that these champions are going to be excelling. And while we're on that topic, let's highlight somebody in the A tier who I thought would be a lot weaker than he actually was, but also combining what he's doing right now with what's upcoming on the patch, he could be pretty scary, and I might actually even be underestimating him. He might be worthy of an S tier. Let's talk about Karthus briefly. This champ got some pretty nutty changes that really actually helped him more in the jungle than anything else, which was the exact opposite of what Riot Games wanted to do. But I mean, by this point, that's kind of standard, right? They always seem to do the exact opposite of what we and maybe even they want. The facts are showing that Karthus has been doing good all throughout 10.14 and coming into 10.15, where he's actually an insanely good champion in anti-dive scenarios and also diving scenarios because of his extremely powerful slow and crazy AoE and DPS. Even when dead, he might actually be worth moving up to the S tier, but I'm going to stick him in A tier because there's still always a chance that other champions pose a really big issue to him in the laning phase, and he never gets to where he wants to be, to where when he's actually dead, he feels really impactful. In general, long-range mages are also going to be doing well because of their natural stifling properties in lanes and fights, where they usually have some kind of good CC or really far range that just makes it impossible to dive onto them, and that's their sort of form of anti-dive. That's why Zilean, Kog'Maw, Xerath, and Swain are all joining Karthus and moving from the B tier to the A tier. Kog'Maw is another champion that's worth talking about, but we're going to cover him later on when we get to the bot lane anyways, so I'm not going to give him a double spotlight. He's not that crazy. On our last tier list update, I also went over in depth why Akali actually deserves to be and is in D tier, and I'm glad that some of you guys even took the time to comment and agree and tell me what you also thought. And I even noticed some of you who were disagreeing before comment in the opposite direction and actually saw what I was trying to explain, and that's awesome. So if there's any other champion that you're really kind of confused about or really wondering more on, make sure you comment about it, because I can address it the next time we do a tier list update, even if the champion doesn't necessarily move around. Because after all, if you don't understand the tier list or something about it, then it's not as useful as it could be, and that's the exact opposite of my goal. And not even just my goal, but the other guys too, like Panther and Unsung, who also make videos. We are just trying to teach you guys. And I mean, hey, our whole website is literally just that. Us and other challenger level content creators trying to teach you guys champions, mechanics, macro, or whatever else you need in order to win. But now that we've covered the mid lane list, let me move on to the top lane list and start talking about the champions there. In the broken tier, Singed is still up there, and honestly, he's kind of a question mark. I'm not 100% sure he's going to be broken tier on the patch, but I don't exactly see a reason why he wouldn't be, given that he's been there for quite a while, and there's nothing that's really going to impact him in lane, because when you look at the other champions who are also in the broken tier, Urgot and Shen, they're not particularly fantastic at dealing with Singed, and even the other champions who have moved up into the S tier of Garen, Volibear, and Sion, they're not really that great either. If you do happen to be having trouble with Singed that are in your game, then you should probably be picking either Urgot or Garen, as they are what I would consider to be the best picks into Singed, but he's not that popular, so you're not going to be playing into him every single game. What you might actually experience in most of your games, or if not experiencing it, you're literally playing it, would be Shen, because he got a direct buff to his shielding, and it's actually really huge. Let me paint you a little picture here, right? You're in the top lane, you're farming away, and for some reason, the enemy champion is a cheating champion, you know, one of those ranged champions, and they come up to auto attack you, and you're just like, nah, let me just use my Q and summon my shield and take literally 0 damage from the auto attack. Shen couldn't quite do that before because his shield was a little bit weaker in the early game, but it just got a flat 20 buff at all levels. And it's at that point where he's pretty much taking 0 damage from an auto attack or even some abilities thanks to how big the shield is. And you could do this a lot, the cooldown is not that long. So now you've got a tank whose laning phase is actually pretty godlike into people who could normally harass other melee champions, and because of that, he's also stronger into the other melee champions who try to bully him, because with constant shielding and constant better shielding, he's actually going to be able to slap their heads in. And if you're slapping heads in on Shen, you've got an experience lead or a gold lead, or probably both, and with that, you can teleport to your allies around the map, save them, or maybe even make proactive plays and start smashing other lanes because you won yours. And that's like the solo carry dream. Earlier, I had also mentioned a couple champions moving up into the S tier, Garen, Volibear, and Sion, and the reason why they are moving up is because they're good in multiple ways. They can also dive pretty heavily, just as heavily as pretty much any other tank or bruiser. However, they're also good in anti-dive scenarios because, you know, one reason or another. Volibear has really good sustain, shielding, and the ability to ignore CC and CC other people. And that's like pretty much everything you want to stop people from diving on top of you, because no matter what they're doing, you have some option to deal with it, whether it be soaking damage, healing back damage, or preventing them from dealing the damage. And Sion and Garen are similar in this exact way, with silences, knockups, stuns, slows, shielding, damage reduction, and all that other good stuff. Having the flexibility to do both while also having pretty solid laning phase and decent scaling makes them a pretty scary proposition, and definitely champions that I see performing better on this upcoming patch. For the most part, after that, a lot of the other top lane champions kind of stay where they are, but there's a couple others that I do want to highlight, namely Aatrox moving up, since he's so heavily committed to the dive, and it's also really good at countering diving melee champions with the movement, CC, knockups, and all the stuff that he actually has, that he should actually be doing pretty well, at least compared to before. He still does have problems where every item after his first 2 items kind of feel meh, but that's just how the champion functions, and not really something that Riot's going to change without some serious numbers work on him. The other big highlight here is going to be Kennen moving up to A tier, and a lot like the other champions who moved up from A tier to S tier, he has the ability to be an anti-dive champion or a dive champion, but he's definitely stronger in the dive. And since there's going to be a lot more opportunities for him to go in with the way that the patches have been trending, then it allows him to find more of those crazy combos. And even beyond that, if people manage to escape, they won't be able to escape what the rest of his team has to offer, since he literally forces out every single mobility spell in the game. Otherwise, you simply die to his damage and CC. One little tip before we move on from the top lane, a lot of the champions who've moved up and a lot of champions who are strong right now in general in Broken S and even a little bit in the A tier on top lane have the ability to coordinate really risk-free dives or really easy anti-dive situations with the jungler. So if you manage to actually get somebody from your team, not even just your jungler, to come over to you to either dive, roam, gank, whatever somebody, something like an Urgot ulti immediately makes the scenario extremely bad for the enemy top laner. A Volibear ultiing on the tower, really hard to deal with kinda, because you know, you can't do any damage and the tower isn't gonna help you out either. This is exactly what you need to be abusing in order to actually smash the top lane, and it's one of the reasons why anti-dive is so important right now. With the top lane wrapped up, we can now move on into the jungle, or as I like to call them, the Bush Boys. And the Bush Boys are actually pretty surprising this patch, with quite a few, let's say, annoyances making appearances in the upper ends of the tier list. Broken tier right now, a lot like last patch's jungle, actually is really hard to make a call on, which, let me just say, I didn't say this last time, it's actually a very good thing, because this means that the jungle is actually relatively balanced on the upper end, and so if Riot focuses on buffing the weaker junglers, or maybe just nerfing all of the top junglers a tiny bit, then you're going to have a really good balanced situation where most junglers can see play. Volibear and Vi are going to be my picks for the broken tier on this upcoming patch, as they are champions who are good at diving and anti-dive, and on top of that they either got a buff or a nerf that affected them really well or didn't affect them too much. Honestly though, I really wouldn't be surprised to see any of the junglers in S tier move up and overtake them when we actually look at the best champions later on in the patch, because really it's a tight race. With the meta shifting around and certain changes coming and going and settling into place, there's also quite a few champions moving around here, but almost all of them moving up. The only person who I was considering but didn't actually move downwards was Lee Sin, who did just get a bit of a nerf that's quite a big deal. He's one of the champions who got their mobility nerfed, and losing 2 seconds, or if you're using it on an ally, 1 second on your cooldown can matter when it's an ability that has decent range and is your only source of mobility, as well as shielding and lifesteal and spell vamp, and yeah, quite a few things. Setskarner and Karthus all moved from the B tier to the A tier. Karthus was my bad on last patch. I completely misidentified the numbers on what was actually going to impact his jungle clear. It actually ended up getting better, which surprised me because I, for a moment there, assumed that Riot Games could do math, and I was like, yeah, that looks about right, but it was not right. It was anything but right. The real big swing here, though, is the Skarner, because that man, or, well, crystal scorpion thing, is getting maximum health-based damage on his Q, and that's an ability with a very low cooldown, and they aren't really impacting the actual scaling of the ability. They do end up changing the AD ratio, but this is made up for in free max health damage, and it's not even that much of a difference. Overall, when you're doing the empowered ability, it's still going to be roughly the AD scaling what it was before at rank 1, which isn't bad when you add on the AP scaling if you happen to be building AP, and of course, the max health damage. We'll have to see if Captain Flower's Chad Skarner build still stays around after these changes, but they definitely don't look bad for Skarner's overall health. It's going to be interesting to see how the itemization on Skarner changes, but just by this alone, if nothing actually ends up changing and being better, it's still going to be great for him because he can clear objectives way faster and has better dueling. This of course also affects jungle camps in general, so his clear at all stages is going to be faster, which is never a bad thing. Watch out for those sneaky scorpions. They can sting really hard. The last little touch that the jungle has received that's really worth mentioning is that the Shen buff in top lane also affects jungle Shen, so I'm moving him from C to B tier, as it will be just straight up like 100 more health in your clear, which is kinda insane. And you know, more shielding in any fight that you happen to take, which is, again, kinda insane. And of course, Gragas also got AP ratio buffs, which is a pretty big deal, as his abilities aren't really long cooldown, and he is effectively a burst assassin, so it's really careful to watch out for those barrels coming your way. With all that being said, I've wrapped up the Bush Boys, so now let's move on to the bot lane and talk about AD carry, which has also gotten quite a bit of movement this patch. Immediately right away, I know you guys were questioning the Kog'Maw placement in the past, and I'm going to address this directly. Because it would seem like right now, if anything, I would think that Kog'Maw would be worse since there's going to be so much dive, but you also got to factor in the anti-dive champions that could be on Kog'Maw's team, like the Galio that we spoke about being in the broken tier in mid lane. Kog'Maw's performance has actually been really solid for a long time now. Ever since supports really saw that swing towards people who are really good at enabling AD carries, Kog'Maw was fantastic, and I mean, it makes sense. He's one of the highest, if not the highest DPS champions in the game, who could absolutely shred through just about anybody, tank or squishy, no matter what they're building. The thing is, he just needs a little bit of time to do so, and that can be tough when the only thing you have in your kit is a slow. But it is a heavy slow with a large AoE. Still, if somebody's unstoppable, like an Olaf, or leaping over walls, a slow ain't gonna save you from anything. The reason why Kog'Maw is allowed to be so effective is that most champions can't actually bully him properly in the bottom lane. This is a problem that's present in bot lane as a whole, where a lot of champions who can normally punish really hard are not in a good spot, and so champions who are really good at scaling, or even hard scaling builds like building a Muramana on, say, Ashe or something, is allowed to exist. And some of you might also take Kog'Maw's win rate change in 10.14 to mean that he's actually on the decline and say, why are you putting him in broken tier still, Ace? And I'll tell you why. If you take a deeper look at Kog'Maw statistics, you should pay attention to what runes are being taken on the champion, no matter what lane he's being played in, but of course here, we're looking at bot lane. And when you take a closer look, you can see the runes that he takes change dramatically ever since he got the buff to his AP ratios, where AP Kog'Maw is now a lot more popular and also a lot stronger. It's really important to have the insight on the runes that are being taken, because a lot of the times a drastic difference in runes means a drastic difference in build and completely shifts the performance of a champion. In Kog'Maw's case, Comet has like a 20% pick rate on patch 10.14, when before that, in 10.13, it had a 4% pick rate. This changes the distribution where people are now picking Comet, which has a roughly 50% win rate, way more often than they were before, which now offsets his performance on lethal tempo builds, which are absolutely smashing it. And this can be even further explained by acknowledging the fact that AP Kog'Maw is not particularly easy to play. Actually, let's not even go that far. Let's just actually admit the fact that AP Kog'Maw plays really differently to AD Kog'Maw. And that's a big deal, because people who were playing him before are now doing something completely different and are probably going to lose on it. Alright, that was kind of long-winded, but hopefully that makes a lot of sense as to why you need to take a deeper dive on champions, and why I'm also not convinced that Kog'Maw should move downwards. But on the opposite side of the block, champions who definitely deserve to move upwards were Ashe and Yasuo. As with a lot of champions now wanting to dive in and not get kited, these two champions are excellent in those scenarios. They either have mobility or basically cancel out some mobility because they have a heavy slow. You know, I wonder if people who are being shot by Ashe feel like they're walking on Legos, and that's why they move so slowly. Anyways, these champions are all doing really well in the S tier, and honestly some of them might even be worthy of moving up. There's a lot of variance that's going to be happening, because if you happen to watch the Broken Tricks video, you probably noticed that there's some itemization stuff going on for AD carries that could really change the game. The other big point out here is that Caitlyn is moving up to A tier, as while she is only getting 2 AD and 5 movement speed, those are still big changes when you consider that a lot of other AD carries are weaker due to being nerfed over and over again in certain patches, and so just even a small comparative buff can be the tipping point where Caitlyn all of a sudden starts to be really, really oppressive. The last thing I'm going to go over for AD carries is somebody in the D tier, and that's Kai'Sa, and that's because I've seen a lot of you guys point out, why is Kai'Sa in D tier? You know, this tier list over here puts her in Broken tier, or, you know, over here she's S tier. And let me tell you right now, whoever's making those needs to seriously reconsider what they're doing. Now, granted, our tier list is made for low elo. It's aimed at people in Platinum and below, which does change things up. But I cannot see a universe where this champion is somewhere in S tier or Broken tier, even in high elo. A tier? Yeah, maybe. S tier, that's a bit of a stretch, buddy. And there's reasons why. Let me jump into them, right? First of all, Kai'Sa's early game comparatively to other AD carries is a lot weaker than most, and she can get bullied around because she has short range and her damage isn't that great, which is a really big problem. This also leaves her open to a lot of issues with some support matchups, and a lot of the time the support is going to have to carry the lane early on, which is not what you want to have happen to you when you're in low elo and can't necessarily rely on your teammates, so -1 for that. Additionally, it's very hard to scale on Kai'Sa because you don't get as much gold because before you're getting bullied, like I said, and so even though your items are kind of cheap in the Muramana and some of the other items like Rageblade are in the middle of the pack for expenses, you're still having problems. On top of that, because you put yourself on a little bit of a backwards timer because you're waiting for the tier to really stack to start popping off a ton, and of course you also need Rageblade auto attacks before fighting to reach your maximum potential, then you're gonna have issues where fights happen really, really quickly, or you get dove on because you can't touch the wave because you're getting outranged and outpushed, or anything in between where you're causing some issues to yourself because you simply can't get the stacks. But let's say you've made it past the early game, no problem, you know, your opponents are brain dead, you're able to just lane for free, you get to farm a ton. Okay, great. Now what? You still don't have an E-Evolve because you haven't managed to actually get any of the other items that you need for the attack speed prerequisite, and you don't have your W either. So it's not like you have a ton of poke, and it's not like you have a ton of disengage either other than your ulti, but if you're using your ulti to get out, chances are you're already in a situation where you can't deal damage, or you're already dead. This means that you need to rely on somebody on your team to actually do something for you to open up an opportunity, or hope you can surprise somebody or somebody just shuts off their monitor, I don't know. Eventually, it does get to the point where you no longer have any of these issues because you're hitting all your item breakpoints, you have all your evolves, your cooldowns are pretty low, you have tons of shreddability on people no matter what they're building, But every single point up until you reach that apex of your items, you're always having problems, and even beyond that, she's a hard champion to play. So with all this stuff being mixed together, what exactly is Kai'Sa's redeeming qualities? An amazing late game? I mean, sure, but how do you actually get there without being carried there by some teammate? And honestly, there's other stuff that I can dive into, but I'm pretty sure I've already wasted like 2 minutes talking about Kai'Sa here, and so I'm not going to keep going because I have to also cover the supports. Hopefully though, that generates you guys some good ideas and even questions if you're still wondering why she's that low, given some circumstance that you're thinking about. Now finally, let's cover the supports. And honestly, this one's going to be kind of simple because I did talk about it a lot when I came to the top lane champions and even when I was talking about AD carries. With the way things are looking, people are losing mobility slowly over time as patches egg on. You know, we saw it in the Thresh change, we saw it in Lee Sin changes on this patch, we saw it on Ezreal changes previously, other stuff like that has been going on for a while now. And so with all this happening, champions who are good at diving and also really good with anti-dive capabilities are very important right now. And that's why in the broken tier, I'm putting Maokai and Zilean in because there's a lot of S tier supports, as I'm sure you already spied out. It was actually really tough to figure out who should be there because really almost any champion could pop off on this patch in the support role because of the changes that are really going to be apparent when you're looking for fights, skirmishes, and even team fights in the late game. Maokai and Zilean shine in both engage and disengage scenarios thanks to their synergy with their allies and of course their kits with both premises. And you'll notice a lot of the champions that moved up into the S tier also have the same thing, and the ones that are sticking around still have it too. Leona is a great example of somebody who has 3 CCs that can be used to both engage and disengage and peel. Lulu is also a great example. Her ulti is amazing at peeling people, and her W is too. Even if people actually do manage to get on top of you, they're slowed as if they weren't already by your Q, and her E is a shield, which is just great for protecting anybody. Scrolling all the way down to the bottom of the S tier, you'll notice that Swain and Shaco are there, and Swain is pretty unique as he is getting a lot of changes on this patch, and I do think that these changes are more suited to making Swain support more powerful. Swain support is often the type of champion who wants to get into sticky situations, and with his Q cooldown being lowered and piercing through other targets, he doesn't actually want to have to peel backwards at all. Swain is really good at diving and forcing pressure onto people by cutting off pathways with his E and his W, but he's also good at anti-dive just by existing because he's a really irritating body that people have to make it by, and they also really can't ignore because he does so much damage. Shaco's there in a similar sense where he can do a lot of really annoying damage by throwing daggers at people, and his boxes are one of the best things for peeling in teamfights, and his clone is too, because if you can actually manipulate your clone properly, you get one of the most annoying CC and damage combos in the game. Considering that many times he takes Glacial Augment or sometimes even Summoner Spellbook, you can have a lot of really irritating things thrown at the enemy team, whether they be slows or just shutting them down with something like an exhaust. And if I was to point out somebody who is quintessentially the most engage and disengage oriented champion in the support role, I would have to talk about Braum as a top contender there, because his shield just straight up blocks projectiles that are trying to hit his allies, and he also has CC to disengage. Not only does he have CC to disengage, but you can also engage with his R and even his Q to a certain extent. One thing I can definitely say for certain is that this patch is going to be really interesting, and I'm curious to see if my predictions actually end up being close or even exactly correct. That would be kind of crazy. Lastly, I've got something crazy for you, our website, GameLeap.com. We've got guides there that are all done by challenger level players, and we're releasing a ton of new videos all the time. We also have a 50% off sale there on the website for the summer, so make sure you check it out now. It's literally the best time to do so. When your goal is to improve in League and win games, it's really a no-brain choice to make. You're not going to be able to find content that gets to go super in-depth like we can over on the website, so really, go check it out. It's going to be a great resource for you to learn stuff on League. And as always, my name is Ace Windstorm, and I will see you all later.